Hello everyone. Today I want to talk about vaccines, specifically the coronavirus vaccine. Obviously it's in the news now, a ton of hype about it, a lot of controversies. So let's see if we can kind of sort things out a little bit. So first of all, what's a vaccine do? The whole concept is when we're invaded, if you will, let's take the pneumococcus that causes pneumonias, that bacteria. Our body sees that as a foreigner, not self is the word we use, and our body creates an immune response to it to try and kill it, to block it from causing infection. So the idea of a vaccination is to build up immunity before we ever see that particular bacteria or virus. We get the flu shot each year so that we're prepared in case we come in contact with the flu. No vaccine is ever 100% effective, and the flu vaccine is a pretty good example of that. Last year, I think it was like 50% effective or something like that. Although, for those it doesn't prevent the infection, it usually means the infection's less severe. So, very worthwhile. Now, the coronavirus, if you remember the pictures of it, here's a virus, but it has these spikes that stick up all around it. And those spikes are made of protein, and it's that spike that allows it to attach to a cell in our body. So, in making up a vaccine, one approach is to try and attack or create an immunity, a response to that those spikes. So, there are three general types of vaccines right now. One is what are either called a killed virus or an attenuated virus vaccine. Now, killed is just that, it's killed. And if you think back to the polio vaccines, the first one, the Salk vaccine, was a killed virus vaccine, and you got it by injection. A number of years later came the Sabin vaccine. It was attenuated, so it's a live virus, and you took it by drinking it down, and it caused an infection in the general intestinal system, gastrointestinal system, but it was mild, you didn't really know it, and it never went on to paralysis. So that was an attenuated vaccine. Now, there are a couple of different Chinese biopharmaceutical firms that are working with the attenuated virus concept, and they're charging ahead. Now there's another approach, which is to transfer a part of the virus, just a part, and in this case the protein that makes up the spike, and they take the spike and they put it in another virus, in this case an adenovirus. An adenovirus that doesn't cause any kind of disease. It can infect but not cause disease. So the adenovirus becomes a carrier of this spike. And the idea is that the spike will be seen by the body as a foreigner and will mount an immune reaction to it, antibodies. So that's the second type. And there's a number of companies working with that. You've probably heard and read recently about the Oxford University vaccine. They've tied up with AstraZeneca, one of the huge pharmaceutical firms, and so that's one of these spike proteins in an adenovirus. Another Chinese company called CanSino Biologics, they're using the same concept, and they've gotten far enough along that the Chinese government is actually using it right now in the military. So they give an approval for the military. A certain logic in that. Every country wants their military to be up and ready to go. And if you've got a whole lot of people infected, that means you're not prepared, you're not ready. You think back a couple of months ago, we had that carrier out in the Pacific where a huge number of the crew became infected with the coronavirus. They had to eventually dock in Guam, come off the ship. Really meant that that carrier was out of commission for a period of time. So for the military, it's very important to be able to deal with infectious diseases. Just as an aside, if you think back to the Civil War, probably as many people died of infection as they did of bullets at that time. Now there's another one that's being looked at of this putting it into a carrier, and that's the Russian one called Sputnik 5. And that's the one, remember, President Putin said, oh, my daughter's taken it, and she's just been fine. He didn't say whether he had taken it or not, but anyway, that's, although he said it was approved, it's actually still in phase 3 trials in Russia. And then, now the third, so we had the attenuated or whole virus type thing. We've got these proteins put into an adenovirus. And the third type is to take a piece of the genetic material from the virus and basically inject that and have that genetic material produce a protein which then will be seen by our immune system as foreign, and that will be will create antibody to that. So first I should point out, it's never been done before. This is absolutely new, but because the Chinese government put out the genetic code, if you will, of the virus, of the coronavirus, some companies took to it right away, and one of them was Moderna in Boston, and they were able to get started back in January, February, and move things along quickly, so that they have a vaccine that they were able to put into trials very early. They're hooked up with the National Institutes of Health, and their trials are moving along. I'll come back to that in a few minutes. And then Pfizer, the giant pharmaceutical firm, Pfizer, is likewise using a similar approach with what's called a messenger RNA, or mRNA. So watch for that. So those are some of the ones that are kind of the furthest along, but there are, I don't know, over 100 different vaccine candidates out there, and I'll come back to some of that in just a minute. So the hype is incredible right now, and the controversies and the conspiracy theories and everything else. But basically, how does a vaccine get approved? It goes through a whole regulatory approach, which is very, very stringent. Usually, it takes anywhere from 5 to 15 years to get a vaccine from initiation all the way through approval. The fastest one so far was the mumps vaccine a number of decades ago, which took 4 years. So to try and get something out as fast as we're going now is really pretty incredible. So that's the process. Well, first of all, a company does their research and their development. They've got to do test tube studies, they've got to do animal studies, and if it works there, then they'll move on to humans. Remember that in medicine, whether it's vaccines or drugs, whatever, a lot of great ideas, but only a few make it. So anyway, the first human studies go through what's called phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and sometimes phase 4. So let's just run through them. Phase 1 is with a small number of people, and is to look at safety, but also to look at what dose first of all, does it work at all, and at what dose. So one of these vaccines that I just mentioned use 2 different doses, and I'll just use the terms 5 units and 25 units. The 5 unit worked, the 25 unit worked. Well, that means they could go with the lower dose, the 5 units, and have an effective vaccine, presumably. So that's in a small number of people. Then you move on to what's called phase 2. It's a larger number with the dose that's been selected, and you then see about whether you get good antibody response in a larger number of people, and again you're looking for safety. If that all goes well, and again many get eliminated at that point in time, but if that goes well, you go on to phase 3, and that's a very large number of people, and you want to have a lot of diversity. You got to have not just volunteers that are, say, between the ages of 20 and 40, and all white males. You got to have racial diversity, age diversity, ethnic diversity. All you want to see whether it's going to be effective in everybody, not just a certain subpopulation. Or if not in a certain population, you need to know that. Between each phase, the FDA looks at all the data and says it's okay to move on to the next phase. Anyway, if you get to the end of phase 3, and that's when the FDA can approve it, or not, and then it can be released for manufacturing. I'll come back to that in a minute. There's also a phase 4, and a phase 4 is after it's released, following people up to see whether there's any type of side effect that wasn't picked up in the beginning, even with these large trials, phase 3 trials, but to see if anything gets picked up that might be very uncommon or at least less common and just wasn't seen in those studies. So that's an important element as well. Now, back in the spring, the United States government created something they called Operation Warp Speed. And this is really an audacious project that says we're going to get a vaccine out in less than a year. It's going to be safe, it's going to be effective, it's going to be in millions and millions of doses, and it's going to be delivered to providers and from providers to people. So, how'd they do it? Or how are they doing it? First of all, the idea is to produce at least 100 million doses by the first of the year. 100 million. So there were over 300 million in the country, at least 100 million by the first of the year. Maybe even more. But that's amazing that from spring till the first of the year, 100 million units of an effective and safe vaccine. So we'll see. Now, there is some possibility, but I think it's low, who am I to know, but just from what I've heard and read, that there might be something out by as early as the 1st of November. Now, of course, that's being said, oh, that's just political. The president wants it out in time for the election. And I'm sure that's true. Of course it is. But the more important thing, and why did the Center for Disease Control director, Dr. Robert Redfield, he told the potential providers, state health departments and others, you got to be ready. If this is real, if it turns out that we have a vaccine by November 1st, it would be a catastrophe if we've got it, if it's manufactured, it's delivered, but you can't get it to people. So a big push to be sure that when the vaccine's out there, it can in fact be delivered. So the government has selected a number of companies. I mentioned just a few of them before, and it's created contracts with them in the billions of dollars to go through these studies and then to manufacture and have it ready and get it out. So what that means is usually a company, they have to be cautious. They don't know if it's going to work or not work. But in this case, the government's saying, okay, it hasn't been fully tested out yet. We want you to start manufacturing right now. Because if at the end of phase 3, if it turns out to be a go, let's just have it ready. Let's not then now stop and figure out how to manufacture it and take the time to do it. So have the doses ready to go. And so that's what's happening. These companies are manufacturing right now as we speak, and they'll be ready to go as soon as they get approval. Well, why so many different companies? Well, there's two good reasons. One is one of them or more of them could fail. That's common in these studies, so we'll see what happens. The second one is no one company can make as many doses as is desired for the whole country, and for that matter for the rest of the world. So each is being told you got to make 100 million doses to start, but then up to 1 billion doses after that. So we'll see what happens, and these companies are making them right now, and it's pretty impressive. Let's go back to phase 3 for a minute. Each of these studies in phase 3 includes 30,000 people, volunteers of course. They give informed consent, and half of them, 15,000, get a placebo, 15,000 get the vaccine, whichever company it might be. And then they're followed, they're checked to see if they develop infection, they're checked to see if they develop a side effect, any side effects. And so that's what's going on, and it's going on as we speak. Now, not all the companies have theirs out in phase 3 yet. Johnson & Johnson does not yet. It will be coming soon though. So these other companies I mentioned, they're already in phase 3. Should add in that these trials are all what are called double-blind placebo-controlled. I mentioned the placebo, but it's randomized. This person over here gets the placebo, this person gets the vaccine, but no one knows, including the person who gives it or the person who gets it. They don't know which they got, and if I'm the one, doing the study, I don't know which I gave. It's because it's a coded vial. And that code is kept by what's called a data monitoring committee. Data Monitoring and Safety Committee. And they look at the data on an ongoing basis. And the concept here is, okay, 30,000 is a lot of people. It might take all 30,000, but it might take less to find out the answer. The answer being, does this one, the placebo, of course, they'll get infected. The ones who got the vaccine, should come way down if it's effective. Now you've heard Dr. Fauci, the director of the NIH Infectious Disease Institute, say if it's just 50% effective, we'll accept that because that's right now it's a big deal. So that would be a big help even at 50%. Of course, everybody hopes it's going to be more than 50%. And if it is 50% prevention of infection, again the hope would be that those who still get infected, it'll be much milder. Okay, so that's the various phases. The next is manufacturing. I've really kind of mentioned it already, but this is a logistical nightmare for companies to be able to manufacture this much. They got to put it into vials, so they got to get these glass vials from somewhere. So if somebody else is manufacturing that, it all has to come together. They've selected one company, McKesson, to deliver it from the manufacturers to the various providers. And then, as I said, we got to have the providers ready to go. Now, 100 million is not enough for the whole country. Certainly not enough for the whole world. So again, that's why multiple companies, you'll have, hopefully we'll have multiples of 100 million. But again, every company's vaccine may not work, so we'll have to wait and see. Let's hope many of them. But the way it's going to have to be is to have a priority list. Who's going to get it first, second, third? And they haven't fully revealed just how the priority list will work, but you can make some assumptions. First is that there'll be first responders and healthcare workers, because they're the greatest risk people. I wouldn't be surprised if on the side there's the military, for the reasons I mentioned before. And then coming down the most vulnerable, people in nursing homes, those who are older, especially older with underlying diseases, then other underlying diseases. And then maybe people in settings that where the risk of transmission is very high. And I mentioned before, like a carrier or another Navy ship of that type. So that'll be, so when it gets down to, let's say, the average person, that won't be January 1st. That'll be further on. And just yesterday, today is the 18th of September, just yesterday, Dr. Redfield, head of the CDC, testimony in the Senate said, I don't remember his exact words, but the essence of it was, if you're just the average person, so to speak, healthy person, don't expect to get the vaccine on January 1st. Expect it much later, maybe 6 months later. So we could be looking at anywhere from, 6 months to 9 months before everybody gets vaccinated. Now here's a big issue, I think. Polls have been taken and said, if you were offered the vaccine, would you put your arm out and take it? And as a while back, only 2 out of 5 said yes. Only 2 out of 5. That's really concerning. There's always some who say, no, I'm a little wary. But why is it such reticence to take this vaccine once it's available, once it's been tested and so on? And I think there's a lack of, well, number one, a lack of understanding about the process these things go through. Yes, we're moving fast, but it's being done really very deliberately, very carefully. And in fact, with the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, You might recall a week or so ago, they stopped it. The State Data Safety Monitoring Committee stopped the vaccine trial while they checked out the potential complication. That got through and it was restarted, although our NIH is saying they want more information about the whole thing. So that's one, not lack of adequate information. Unfortunately, there's a lack of trust in the government, and we all know that, and that's a problem. That's just a problem. And of course, we have partisan politics, an election coming up. All that gets in the way of just, rational thought, if you will. And the media is no help at all. Everything gets hyped. It's always that little snippet of information out of context, which I think is terribly unfortunate, but it helps, sell papers and get eyeballs onto websites and so on. And then, of course, social media is just rife with bad information. A lot of conspiracy theories around. There's no conspiracy here. It is pretty straightforward and very well organized. Can something go wrong? You bet. But it sure looks like it's being done carefully, effectively, and with a lot of attention to safety. So, not my job to give advice, medical advice, so I won't, but I'll make a couple of suggestions. There's no such thing as a perfect drug or a perfect vaccine. Everything has a risk-reward. Aspirin can take down your fever, can do a lot of good things, but you can get an allergy to it, you can get a bleeding ulcer from it. A lot of, there are things about aspirin that aren't perfect. So it's always risk-reward, risk and reward. So the question for each of us will be, here's the data on the vaccine, here's what we know about the virus. Is it worth it to me to take the vaccine or not? My prediction, as I said, there will be a vaccine. There'll be at least one by January 1st, and maybe November 1st. Who knows? It'll be used for those or offered to those in greatest need. And I think what's most important for each of us, stay well informed, avoid the hype, as I said, and then make your best decision. I know what mine will be. If it gets through all the regulatory approvals and it's available, I'll put my arm out. Thanks very much.